Meanwhile, in the distance, a cloaked figure observed from the shadows. "What's going on with that boy?" he muttered to himself. Without any formal training, he's already reached 1-star level, and he killed that anger boar with a single strike. What puzzled the observer even more was how Zeke had managed to detect his presence. "That child isn't ordinary," he said quietly. He recalled that Zeke's mother had died young, and his father, the current family, had shown absolutely no interest in the boy. Without proper guidance or mentorship, the child shouldn't have developed this level of strength. Still, as the son of the Dragon head, illegitimate or not, Zeke was bound to remain under the clan's surveillance. That was precisely why someone of his caliber had been assigned to monitor the boy from the shadows. An illegitimate son, yet the blood of the family head runs through his veins, the man whispered. Could that be the source of his strength? Uncertain but intrigued, he chuckled softly. That kid will be fascinating to watch in the future. Then he vanished into the darkness. Back at Zeke's residence, the boy was packing his belongings, preparing to embark on his journey. But suddenly, he sensed several powerful presences approaching. 3 4-star practitioners and 1 5-star. What are they doing here? He thought, moving quietly to the door to eavesdrop. From their conversation, he heard them commenting on how fresh and clean the air was in such a remote location, and how peaceful it felt since there were no nearby rifts. Hearing this, Zeke concluded they weren't assassins. They didn't sound hostile at all. Deciding to confront them directly, he opened his door and asked what business they had there. The group froze in surprise. Then Zeke noticed the emblem embroidered on their clothing, the mark of the Dragon clan. Dragon, he muttered under his breath, wondering what they wanted from him. The men quickly bowed respectfully. It's an honor to finally meet you, young Master Zeke, their leader said. We've been sent to escort you to the site of your examination. Examination? Zeke frowned in confusion. Annoyance flickered across his face. They expect me to take an exam, he muttered, even though they haven't taught me a damn thing. Several days later, Zeke could hardly believe he'd returned to the main estate of the Dragon family. He wasn't brought here to live within the main estate again, but rather for another purpose entirely. Before he could enter, they instructed him to change out of his travel-worn clothes first. As he prepared, Zeke learned about something known as the Dragon's Nest. After 1,000 years, the Dragon family had established an academy that served all branches of their bloodline. Everyone born with any connection to the Dragon family dreamed of entering this prestigious Dragon's Nest to receive proper education once they turned 7 years old. Today marked the entrance ceremony for that academy. Zeke was here to participate in the entrance examination. Even though he'd learned nothing about the modern generation of his family, taking the exam was mandatory. Zeke immediately felt disheartened when he realized this was the true reason they'd brought him here. Why now, he thought, when I'd already decided to leave and explore the world? While sitting by the academy gate, a boy from Orscale village approached him. It was Rangus, who asked if he was all right and what seemed to be troubling him. When Zeke asked who he was, the boy formally introduced himself as Rangus and explained he'd approached because Zeke looked distressed. Is that so? Zeke replied casually. After observing the flow of energy within Rangus's body, Zeke quietly noted that the boy seemed shy but possessed an unusually strong sense of perception. Zeke then apologized for his demeanor, introducing himself in return, and admitting his mind was in chaos because he had no idea what the exam would entail. Is that all? Rangus said, feeling slightly nervous at the mention of the test. Still, he explained that the annual entrance examination for the Dragon's Nest didn't really change much from year to year. But when Zeke admitted he knew absolutely nothing about the exam, Rangus was shocked, taking the test without any knowledge. Wasn't that far too reckless and dangerous? Just as Rangus was about to explain the exam details, a loud and arrogant voice suddenly interrupted them. A boastful boy shouted, calling Rangus a weakling. Rangus turned around in shock and immediately recognized the speaker. It was Ritan, also from Orscale village. Mocking him cruelly, Ritan asked why he was here, suggesting he must have gotten lost to end up at the Dragon's Nest. He even told him it would be better to go home before he got hurt. I'm here to take the entrance exam, Rangus replied, though his voice trembled as Ritan drew closer, asking if he was seriously going to take the test. Ritan clutched his stomach and burst out laughing, declaring it was impossible for Rangus to pass. He even insulted Rangus's father, sneering, Your father's a pseudo-dragon, right? What could the son of a pseudo-dragon possibly accomplish? Rangus's fists trembled as he fought to contain his anger, but Zeke noticed everything. The Eldragon family followed an absolute hierarchy, it was explained. The ranks were as follows: novice whelp dragons at entry level, regular soldier child dragons, captain level adult dragons, executive elder dragons also known as elders at the leadership tier, and at the very bottom were the pseudo-dragons. These were individuals who had failed to enter or graduate from the dragon's nest, considered immature and incomplete dragons. Yet Rangus had long dreamed of proving that even if they were called pseudo-dragons, they were still dragons nonetheless. Zeke was intrigued and asked why Reitan was so certain Rangus would fail the exam before it even started. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Reitan snapped, asking if Zeke had a problem with him. Zeke calmly replied he was merely curious why Reitan was so confident Rangus couldn't pass. Reitan pointed at Rangus and shouted that the reason was obvious. He was just a weakling. Zeke tilted his head thoughtfully and asked if he really believed Rangus was weak, because from what he could sense, Rangus seemed even stronger than Reitan and his companions. Hearing that declaration, Rangus's eyes widened in disbelief. It was the first time anyone had ever stood up for him. The arrogant boys grew furious, demanding to know if Zeke was seriously claiming they were weaker than a pseudo-dragon, a rank they considered utterly inferior. But before the confrontation could escalate further, a commanding presence arrived and drew everyone's attention. He was an adult dragon examiner, announcing that the Dragon's Nest entrance examination was about to commence, and that all participants should register to receive their identification numbers. As Reitan departed, he glared venomously at Zeke and warned that he wouldn't forget his face. Zeke sighed, remarking there was no need for such hostility. The children of this generation seemed to possess remarkably short tempers. Rangus quickly replied that it wasn't strange since they were all about the same age. He added that anyone would be angry if told they were weaker than a pseudo-dragon's son. "Is that so?" Zeke muttered lightly. Since the entrance examination was mandatory, they had no choice but to participate. Zeke was surprised when Rangus mentioned it was actually possible to withdraw from the test. Zeke's eyes widened, and Rangus realized he truly knew nothing about the process. Rangus advised that it might be wiser to withdraw now, before getting seriously injured, but Zeke replied confidently that a genius like himself would never back down from a challenge. Rangus could only shake his head, saying Zeke was dangerously overconfident despite his complete ignorance about the examination. Zeke simply laughed, suggesting they hurry since the test was about to begin. Rangus had no choice but to agree. When they arrived at the testing grounds, the examiner announced the exam was straightforward. To pass, participants only needed to scratch the stones placed behind him. However, no personal weapons were permitted, only those provided by the academy. Participants were free to use their bare hands if they wished, but each candidate had only 3 attempts. "That's it," Zeke said, sounding distinctly unimpressed. After surviving the dragon trial as infants, he'd expected something far more terrifying and intense. This seemed disappointingly simple. The examiner then called the first participant and instructed him to begin. The boy, nervous but determined, struck the massive stone with all his strength. The sound of metal clashing against rock echoed loudly, ringing in everyone's ears. But to the crowd's shock, the boy's sword snapped cleanly in half, and the violent recoil shattered his arm. Zeke was stunned by what he witnessed. As the boy writhed in agony, the examiner calmly stated he still had 2 remaining attempts and asked if he wished to continue. But since the boy could no longer stand, the examiner declared him failed and ordered assistants to clear the area. As the injured participant was dragged away, the next number was called. Rangus trembled in fear at what he'd just witnessed, while Zeke grew increasingly annoyed. "So this is what they call an examination," he muttered. He then questioned what kind of stones possessed such properties. The stones had regenerative capabilities, meaning any scratches would vanish instantly. Moreover, they could reflect physical force back at the attacker 100-fold when struck with power. Zeke immediately declared such materials were far too excessive for an entrance exam. But Rangus explained it was still possible to scratch them if one could properly circulate their source power throughout their entire body before attacking. "I see," Zeke said. He realized that source power circulation was far more critical than martial arts technique in this examination. After observing the other participants, he thought only a handful would pass, including those arrogant boys from earlier. As the exam continued, more candidates failed than succeeded. Many sustained severe injuries due to the stone's ability to reflect ordinary physical attacks. Then, after several moments, the examiner called out Zeke's number. "It's my turn," Zeke said with a calm smile. Rangus, still visibly nervous, asked if he truly had no intention of withdrawing, but Zeke simply walked forward, telling him not to worry. As he approached the examiner, The man's eyes widened in shock. Zeke's aura began to surge, faintly revealing the overwhelming might from his previous life as Gilfaz. The examiner instructed him to step forward and select a weapon, but Zeke declined. His fists alone would suffice. The crowd murmured in disbelief. No matter how skilled he might be at circulating source power, they thought there was absolutely no way he could scratch the stone with bare hands. His fists would surely shatter instead. Some spectators declared that not only Zeke's fists but also his arms would be obliterated, which made Rangus extremely anxious for him. Along with his fear came anger toward himself, thinking he should have forcibly stopped Zeke from attempting something so reckless. The examiner gave the signal to begin. As Zeke approached the massive stone, he placed his hand on its surface. Noting this was the first time he'd encountered such a material. It must have been developed over the 1,000 years since his death. Even now, there were countless things about the current era he didn't fully understand, but that no longer mattered. He immediately gathered his source power into his fist. While Rangus trembled with anxiety about Zeke's fate, the protagonist himself was filled with exhilaration. For the first time since his rebirth, he could unleash his full strength. He decided to use this mysterious stone to measure his current power level. Rangus's eyes widened once more as Zeke unleashed the first form of the Dragon Destruction combat technique, Burst Strike. A tremendous surge of energy erupted from the impact. Fragments of shattered rock flew in every direction, and the violent shockwave sent dust and debris swirling through the air. In awe yet defensive, Rangus quickly shielded himself from the devastating aftermath, while the examiner's eyes widened in absolute disbelief at what he'd just witnessed. As the dust began to settle, Zeke stood there with a satisfied smile, remarking that the technique he'd used still seemed too powerful for his current physical condition. Despite the severe injuries covering his hand, he laughed at himself, realizing he still required far more intensive training. The other participants stood speechless at what they'd seen. Rayton looked both shocked and irritated that Zeke had completely destroyed the enchanted stone. A woman observing from the sidelines commented that Zeke was truly fascinating. While the others still couldn't process what had transpired, Zeke waited happily for the examiner to announce the results. But the examiner remained frozen in shock. The stone Zeke had obliterated was designed to regenerate itself, and only practitioners who had already reached 4-star level or higher were supposed to possess the capability to break it. Yet now, a mere child stood before him, having accomplished what seemed absolutely impossible. "He's just an illegitimate son," the examiner muttered to himself, then wondered if Zeke's extraordinary ability stemmed from the blood of the family head that still flowed through his veins.